The sun bled slowly across the ridges of Kyoto. The air was quiet, but there was no peace in the land, only the exhaustion of a country that had bled for over 100 years. The Sengoku era, the age of the warring states, had left behind burnt villages, orphaned children, and thousands of graves with no names. It had reshaped Japan from a nation of emperors into a battlefield of ambitions. And now, though swords had briefly been sheathed, the soil was still warm with the memory of war. In the center of this fragile calm stood the legacy of a man named Toyotomi Hideyoshi. A peasant by birth, a warlord by will, he had risen to become one of Japan's greatest unifiers. He had conquered with cunning and crushed rebellions with fire. His dream was a united Japan, one where no clan rose above the others, and no man challenged his rule. And for a brief moment, he achieved it. But even the strongest foundations crumble when built on blood. When Hideyoshi died in 1598, his son Hideyori was just 5 years old. Too young to rule, too precious to be ignored. He was left in the care of 5 powerful daimyo, each sworn to protect him, each capable of betrayal. Among them was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man who had smiled the widest at Hideyoshi's funeral. Tokugawa waited. He built alliances. He watched the others turn on each other like wolves, and when the time came, he struck. In 1600, at the Battle of Sekigahara, he crushed his enemies and seized power in the name of the shogun. 3 years later, the Tokugawa shogunate was born, and with it began a new order. But Hideyori remained alive, and so did his claim. Osaka Castle was no ordinary fortress. It was the heart of Hideyoshi's legacy, built high and strong, with stone walls that could hold off armies and towers that watched the horizon. Inside lived Hideyori, now a young man in his 20s, and his mother, Lady Adajimai. Around them were thousands of loyal retainers, samurai who remembered the Toyotomi name and carried it like a banner soaked in past glory. And far away in Edo, the new capital, Tokugawa Ieyasu watched with silent rage. He had unified Japan, yes, but not fully. A single spark could set fire to the whole thing again. And that spark lived in Osaka. Years passed in tension. Hideyori remained in his castle, neither submitting nor rebelling. Tokugawa ruled from Edo, consolidating power, marrying off daughters, bribing enemies, silencing resistance. But the silence was too deep. It wasn't peace, it was the stillness before an avalanche. By 1614, the unease had become unbearable. Reports reached Edo. Hideyori was strengthening his defenses. Weapons were being stored, alliances whispered in shadows. Some of the old Toyotomi generals had returned. The castle, it was said, had enough supplies to last years under siege. Ieyasu knew this could not be ignored. He sent a message. It was formal, polite, and sharp as a blade beneath silk. Hideyori was to tear down the castle walls, reduce his army, and swear fealty or face the consequences. The answer came in the form of silence. Then rumors followed. Hideyori had prayed for the defeat of the Tokugawa clan at a temple in Kyoto. Whether true or not, it was the excuse Ieyasu had been waiting for. In the cold winds of late autumn, Tokugawa Ieyasu came out of retirement and called forth the largest army Japan had ever seen. Over 200,000 soldiers gathered under his banners, samurai, footmen, gunners, engineers. It was not a campaign. It was an execution. Inside Osaka Castle, only 90,000 defenders prepared to face them. But they were not ordinary men. These were hardened retainers, warriors raised in the fires of earlier wars, bound not by pay but by loyalty. Among them were masterless ronin who had nothing left but their blades and pride. Their leader was not Hideyori, not truly. He was too young, too inexperienced. The true mind behind the defense was Lady Adajimai, the mother of the boy emperor, the shadow of Hideyoshi's will. She knew what Tokugawa's march meant. There would be no surrender, no mercy. The shogunate wanted not only the castle, but the end of a name. The last blood of Toyotomi had to be spilled if Tokugawa's rule was to be complete. And if they were to fall, they would fall like warriors. That winter, the cold winds carried more than snow. They carried the breath of war. Men sharpened their blades in silence, staring at the horizon where banners of red and black approached like a storm. Farmers were conscripted into digging trenches. Guns were stacked by the walls, and oil was poured into cauldrons above the gates. The moat was frozen, but the hearts inside the castle burned like coals. The siege was coming, and with it, the end of an era. The morning sky above Osaka was gray, heavy with the weight of snow and smoke. The horizon was a jagged line of banners, spears, and armored men marching without music. Tokugawa's army had arrived. 200,000 strong, they moved like a tide against the great stone belly of Osaka Castle. Drums did not beat. Only footsteps, cold and steady, echoed through the earth. Inside the castle, the defenders watched from the ramparts. The old warriors said they had seen battles before, but nothing like this. Men who had once fought in the chaos of Sekigahara now stood shoulder to shoulder with young ronin who had never seen war. They tightened their armor, checked the strings on their bows, the lock mechanisms on their arquebus. Every man knew this fight was not just about a castle, it was about memory, about honor, about whether the Toyotomi name would vanish like dust or remain, even if only carved in blood. Lady Yadajime walked the upper corridors of the inner keep in silence. Below her, fires were being lit. Oil was heated. Arrows were counted. Her son Hideyori was pacing, nervous, his hands smooth and unscarred by war. She watched him quietly, the way a hawk watches a dove. She knew he had been born into legend, not built by it. But she also knew one truth. A dying name has no room for softness. If he was not a warrior, he would at least die like one. The first assault came with the sound of metal striking stone. Tokugawa's men dug trenches under the cover of night and began rolling forward siege towers and cannons, Portuguese-style iron barrels that spat flame and noise but lacked true precision. Still, the first blast shook the castle's outer walls. Smoke burst into the sky. Stones cracked. Archers fired in waves from the walls, their arrows hissing down like black rain. The invaders raised shields of bamboo and iron, some catching arrows in their throats, others climbing over the bodies of the fallen like ants over a broken branch. The moat had frozen in places, but patches of icy water remained. Tokugawa's foot soldiers, known as a shigaru, tried to lay planks across the surface. Many fell through, vanishing into the freezing dark without a sound. Others pushed forward. The Toyotomi defenders unleashed burning oil from cauldrons above, setting fire to the water's edge. Screams rose into the morning wind. Among the defenders was Sanada Yukimura, a ronin and former general who had once served Hideyoshi's forces with unmatched brilliance. His armor was crimson, marked with 6 gold coins, the symbol of his readiness to pay the price of death. He commanded a small elite force on the southern side of the wall, where he'd fortified makeshift wooden towers in anticipation of a flanking attack. As the enemy tried to encircle, Sanada's men leapt from the defenses like fire from a cannon. Blades clashed in the narrow snow-covered trenches. No shouts, just steel, breath, and death. For 3 days, the battle dragged on. Tokugawa's army tried to breach the gates, but Osaka held. They turned to bombardment. Day and night, cannons thundered against the stone. The walls shook, cracks began to appear, and rubble fell onto the heads of the archers above. But the castle did not fall. Inside, women carried supplies to the ramparts. Children patched torn cloth for the banners. Samurai who had once studied poetry now dipped arrows in pitch. Some carved farewell poems into wooden panels. Some prayed. Others simply sat in silence, sharpening their blades and waiting for the enemy to climb over the dead. By the 5th day, Tokugawa ordered tunneling. Engineers were sent beneath the walls, trying to plant charges and destroy the foundations. But the defenders had spies too. The tunnels were flooded. Some were collapsed with controlled fire. Others became death traps, filled with spikes and fire pits. The ground itself had become a weapon. Still, the Tokugawa army pressed forward. They rotated waves of soldiers in shifts, fresh troops every few hours. The defenders had no such luxury. Their numbers were fewer. Every man fought until his arms shook, until his vision blurred from smoke and fatigue. On the 7th night, a breach finally opened. A portion of the outer wall gave way with a deafening roar. Dust and stone blasted into the air. The invaders charged. For the first time, the battlefield moved inside the outer courtyard. What followed was a slaughter. Sanada Yukimura led a desperate counterattack from the side. driving his men into the breach like a blade into flesh. Sword met spear. Armor cracked. Blood steamed on the cold stones. The clash lasted hours. No orders were shouted. There was no time. Men fought face to face, eyes wide with fury and fear. At one point, Sanada was wounded, an arrow to the shoulder, but he refused to fall back. His men dragged him to cover and pushed forward with fire in their veins. The breach was sealed by nightfall, with bodies, hundreds of them, piled so thick the enemy could not pass. The walls of Osaka were still standing, but inside, every corridor now smelled of blood and burning wood. The defenders knew the worst was yet to come. Outside, Tokugawa watched from a high ridge. His face remained still, unreadable. His generals advised him to offer terms. He refused. This was not a negotiation. This was erasure. Snow began to fall again. The winter siege had only just begun. The snow stopped falling by the 13th day, and with it came a strange quietness that unnerved both sides. Smoke still curled into the sky from the cracked stones of Osaka Castle, but the cannons had gone silent. Tokugawa's men stood like shadows along the frozen moats, no longer charging, no longer shouting. The air itself felt like it was holding its breath. Inside the castle walls, the defenders counted their dead. Thousands had perished, some vaporized by cannon blasts, others buried beneath collapsed towers, others frozen in pools of their own blood. The samurai who remained alive moved slowly now, not from fear but from exhaustion so deep it had begun to settle in their bones. Every sword carried weight, not just of steel, but of memory. The walls had held. Barely. Sanada Yukimura lay in a dark room wrapped in bloodied linen. His men surrounded him in silence, waiting for orders that would never come. He was breathing, but only just. A boy barely old enough to hold a blade sat beside him with wide eyes, clutching a tattered piece of cloth that once bore the red coin crest of the Sanada. He did not cry. Even children here had begun to forget what crying meant. Then, as suddenly as the siege had begun, word came. Peace. A letter arrived from Tokugawa Ieyasu himself, sealed and carried by a high-ranking messenger under white banners. The message was clear. He offered a truce. If Osaka Castle would destroy its outer defenses and surrender its cannons, no further blood would be shed. Hideyori would not be executed. His life would be spared. The war could end now. Lady Yadajimai stared at the letter for a long time. She knew the man behind the ink, knew that Ieyasu had not spent 20 years consolidating power just to stop here. But Osaka could not last much longer. Supplies were dwindling. Children were falling ill. The walls, once proud and towering, were now pockmarked with holes and soaked in black soot. Winter was not on their side. After 3 days of deliberation, the Toyotomi agreed. The defenders began the painful process of dismantling their outer walls. One by one, the watchtowers came down. The heavy iron cannons were rolled out and turned over. Tokugawa's men entered the outer areas of the castle, not as conquerors, but as enforcers of the peace. They walked among the ruins with polite words and sharp eyes, taking stock of what remained. The people of Osaka began to breathe again. For the first time in weeks, there were no cries of pain, no howling war drums. Children played in the melted snow with wooden sticks shaped like swords. Women reopened temple doors. The smell of rice returned to the air. But something was wrong. Tokugawa's soldiers never left. They remained stationed around the castle perimeter. They built new embankments and trenches not aimed outward, but inward. Every day, they crept closer, fortifying themselves just beyond the reach of the castle's weakened core. Their numbers grew again, quietly, methodically. Then came the final blow. In the night, without warning, Tokugawa's engineers flooded the outer moat, once emptied during the peace agreement, and then set fire to its banks. The message was clear. The peace had been a trap. Inside the castle, rage spread faster than fire. Lady Yadajimai's voice rose for the first time in days, not with sorrow but fury. She ordered the gates barred, the inner walls reinforced with anything they could find. Spears were pulled from storage, arrows tipped again. Whatever faith had been extended toward peace had died. What remained was instinct old, bloody, and unmerciful. Hideyori, humiliated and furious, took up a blade himself and walked among the defenders. His face was no longer smooth, his voice no longer unsure. In that betrayal, he had tasted what his father had lived through, the truth of power. Across the snowfield, Tokugawa watched as smoke curled from the rebuilt fires. His trap had worked. He had forced them to dismantle their best defenses without lifting another sword. Now, with their walls down, and their spirits broken by the lie of peace, he would end them. And so began the final preparations for the summer siege. A war not just of swords and walls, but of vengeance. The summer sun rose heavy over Osaka, casting a pale orange glow over a land that had already seen too much blood. The warmth should have brought life, but instead it dried the earth, hardened the wounds, and baked the stench of decay into every stone of the battlefield. Grass no longer grew near the castle. Only ash remained. By June 1615, the deception was complete. Tokugawa Ieyasu, now unmasked, stood with an army once again swelling toward 200,000. The piece had been a clever blade, slid gently between the ribs. And now, with the outer defenses gone, Osaka was exposed like a broken ribcage ready to be crushed. But inside, something had changed. There was no more fear, no more hope. There was only fire. The warriors who remained were no longer soldiers, they were survivors. They knew death would come, but they had decided it would not come quietly. The castle's inner walls had been reinforced with wood torn from homes, bodies stacked in defensive mounds, and even broken temple statues used as barriers. Everything was a weapon now. Surrender was not a word spoken inside those walls anymore. Sanada Yukimura, despite his injuries from the winter siege, returned to the front lines, bound in fresh armor. His eyes were hollow but burning. Word spread that he had refused medicine, refused rest. "Let my body rot standing," he had said, "but I will not die lying down." The Tokugawa forces began their assault at dawn. Thousands of Ashigaru surged toward the final wall with ladders, torches, and matchlock guns. This time, there were no cannons to stop them. The defenders waited in silence, bows drawn, muskets steadied on cracked parapets. As the first wave touched the base of the wall, fire exploded across the front lines. Burning oil, ignited arrows, and boiling water poured down with precision. Screams tore through the air, but the ladders kept coming. Samurai clashed on the ramparts, blades drawn, breath heaving in the heat. The clang of steel on steel rang louder than the war drums. Bodies fell on both sides, some sliced clean through, others thrown from the walls with limbs flailing. The moat, now shallow and filled with mud and blood, became a grave. Sanada led a sortie from the gate, a final gamble to push back the pressure. He and 200 men charged directly into the heart of Tokugawa's advance column. It was a suicidal move, but it created chaos. He moved like fire, cutting down 10, 15, maybe more before he was surrounded. His red armor made him a beacon of death. They pierced him from every angle, spears driving through the gaps in his plating. Still, he did not fall. Only when a blade entered his neck did he finally collapse, his blood staining the dust in a perfect circle. By nightfall, half the inner keep was in flames. The sky above Osaka had turned black. Children wept in corners, clutching scorched prayer beads. Women threw themselves from tower windows before they could be captured. And still, the fighting did not stop. Hideyori stood at the heart of the keep, a sword in his hand, his white robes now stained with sweat and dust. His face, once soft with the memory of court life, had hardened into something else, something ancient. He looked to his mother, Lady Adajimai, and the two exchanged no words. There was nothing left to say. They moved together to the ritual chamber beneath the castle, where incense had already been lit. A single blade was placed in the center of the mat. Above them, the sounds of war still echoed. Screams. Fire. Stone breaking under cannon. Below, there was only silence. Hideyori knelt first. He placed both hands on his knees and looked forward, not downward, and then, with calm precision, he opened his own belly. His mother followed. When Tokugawa's men reached the chamber an hour later, they found the body still warm. The blade was still red. Outside, the last of the Toyotomi banners had burned away. The summer siege was over. The samurai way of life had ended in fire. The fires of Osaka burned for 3 days and 3 nights. Smoke twisted through the ruins like mourning spirits, curling over broken rooftops and shattered banners. The great stone bones of the castle still stood in parts, blackened and hollow, like the ribs of a giant who had once stood proud but now lay dead beneath the weight of history. There was no victory song, only silence. Tokugawa Ieyasu stood at a distance, watching the smoke rise. He did not smile. There was no celebration. The siege had been won, yes, but not cleanly, not honorably. It had been a victory built on betrayal, patience, and overwhelming force. The very soul of the samurai had been bled out in the rubble. Soldiers searched the castle remains, dragging charred beams away, checking for any survivors. In the ritual chamber, the bodies of Hideyori and Lady Yadajime were discovered exactly where they had fallen. Their blood had dried into the floor, and their faces remained calm, untouched by fire, like stone figures carved for remembrance. They were buried without ceremony, under watch of Tokugawa guards, in a place no one would mark. In Edo, messengers carried the news to the capital. The Toyotomi clan had fallen. Osaka was no longer a threat. The shogunate now held all of Japan in its grasp. But something deeper had died in those flames. The Sengoku era had created the samurai as legends. Men who lived by code, who fought with discipline, who saw beauty in death and meaning in sacrifice. That ideal had now clashed with the age of gunpowder, deceit, and political conquest, and it had lost. Osaka was not just a battlefield. It had been a funeral pyre. In the months that followed, Tokugawa Ieyasu implemented strict laws to prevent another rebellion. The remaining samurai were stripped of independence. All daimyo were forced to reside part-time in Edo under the Sankin-Kotai system, ensuring loyalty through hostage-like presence. Swords could no longer be freely worn in public. The warrior became a bureaucrat. The battlefield became a court. The very soul of the samurai was sealed inside books, art, and myth, but never again in fire and blood. Some who survived the Osaka campaign fled to the mountains, refusing to submit. They shaved their heads, became monks, or disappeared into the forest where no orders could reach. Others drank until memory faded. The younger ones tried to adapt, but many could not. Their blades rusted. In the countryside, old women told the story of Hideyori and his mother as if they were ghosts who refused to kneel. Children played with sticks, pretending to be Sanada Yukimura, not knowing the real man had died standing, soaked in blood, alone and surrounded. Over time, the name Toyotomi vanished from the scrolls. Temples that once prayed for his victory now held ceremonies for Tokugawa. History bent itself around the victors, as it always does. But the soil remembered. The stones of Osaka still bore the burn marks. In certain corners of the city, no grass grew, only ash, as if the land itself still mourned what had been lost. The castle would one day be rebuilt, polished, and repaired for tourists and emperors. But beneath its clean walls lay a grave that no sign would ever mark. The sword had not only been buried, it had been silenced. And so ended the age of the samurai, not with a cry of victory, but with the quiet fall of a broken banner into bloodied snow. The siege of Osaka, Osaka no Eki, split into two campaigns. Winter Campaign, November 1614 to January 1615. Summer Campaign, May-June 1615. Location, Osaka Castle, Japan. One of the largest and most fortified castles of the era, originally built by Toyotomi Hideyoshi in the 1580s. Main opponents, Tokugawa Ieyasu, former general of Hideyoshi, founder of the Tokugawa shogunate. At the time of the siege, he was technically retired but still the real power behind the shogunate. Toyotomi Hideyori, son of Hideyoshi, rightful heir to Toyotomi power. Born in 1593, he was only 5 when his father died and was raised under political guardianship. Lady Yadajime, Cha-Cha, mother of Hideyori and widow of Hideyoshi, played a powerful political role and led much of the resistance strategy. Military strengths, Tokugawa shogunate forces, 200,000 troops combined from multiple loyal clans across Japan, Toyotomi and Ronin defenders, 90,000, 100,000 warriors, including hundreds of masterless samurai, known as Ronin. Key figures among defenders, Sanada Yukimura, Sanada Nobushige, legendary samurai and master tactician, known for his bravery and strategy during the summer siege. Killed in June 1615 during a last-stand charge. Even Tokugawa praised him posthumously, calling him a hero who may appear once in 100 years. Battle tactics and features. Winter Campaign, Massive artillery bombardments, attempted trenching, and wall breaching failed. Full assault peace treaty signed January 1615 under false pretenses. Summer campaign. Inner defenses only remained. Outer walls destroyed as part of peace terms. Tokugawa army attacked from multiple directions. Sanada's sortie was real and documented. Final assault led to complete destruction of Toyotomi resistance. Notable facts. The peace agreement signed after the winter campaign was intentionally violated. Tokugawa reflooded the moats and rebuilt siege structures immediately after the Toyotomi disarmed. Hideyori and Lady Yadajime committed seppuku, ritual suicide, in June 1615, marking the official end of the Toyotomi family and resistance. After this war, no other clan ever rose against Tokugawa rule during the Edo period, 1603 to 1868. The siege marks the end of true samurai warfare. What followed was 250 years of strict feudal control, bureaucracy, and peace known as the Tokugawa/Edo period. Many historians view the Siege of Osaka as the last real samurai war in Japanese history. Cultural impact. The story of the siege is taught in Japanese history textbooks and still dramatized in films, kabuki plays, and novels. Osaka Castle was rebuilt in modern times and stands as a historical monument today. Beneath it lies the site of the bloodiest civil war Japan ever saw.